The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon, casting a soft glow over the quiet airport. Inside the terminal, Ibrahim Traoré stood by gate 37, as calm as the stillness around him. He wasn't dressed in a sharp suit, there were no bodyguards in sight, and nothing about him screamed importance. To the casual observer, he was just another traveler, another face among the crowd. But Ibrahim Traoré wasn't ordinary. He was the President of Burkina Faso, a leader who chose to blend in, to remain humble and grounded. He preferred it this way. No cameras, no attention. Just a quiet, private existence. His recent trip to Europe had been crucial. Discussions on gold, sovereignty, Africa's future. But now, all he wanted was to get home. As he walked towards the Air France flight bound for Ouagadougou, he greeted an airport worker with a warm smile. "Bonjour, ça va?" The worker smiled back, unaware of the man's identity. And that's how Ibrahim liked it. Anonymous, blending in, just another person in the world. He boarded the plane, exchanged polite nods with the crew, and settled into his seat in business class, row 2A by the window. He opened his phone and began reading, content in his quiet, unobtrusive space. But in the rows behind him, things were starting to stir. A senior French businessman, the CEO of a major energy company, had boarded the plane, but his first-class seat was no longer available. The airline told him business class was full, but he was accustomed to a different standard. He wasn't used to being told no. He made his demands known, surrounded by assistants and staff, tapping his polished shoes in impatience. "I am a strategic partner in many African projects," he boasted, expecting this to earn him preferential treatment. The gate agent scrambled, but the reality was simple. Business class was indeed full. Frustrated, the airline summoned Claire, a senior flight attendant. She was tall, white, and dressed in the sleek Air France uniform. Her demeanor was cold, professional. She walked onto the plane, scanning the cabin with sharp eyes, her gaze pausing when she saw Ibrahim in seat 2A. He didn't stand out. No fancy watch, no entourage, just a man in a hoodie reading his phone. Something didn't sit right with her. She approached him with a forced smile. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" Ibrahim looked up, handed her the pass, and returned to his reading. She stared at the pass and then back at him, but something about him didn't match her expectations. Without saying much, she walked away, her expression tight. But then, moments later, she returned with a decision. She leaned down again, this time more direct. "Sir, I'm afraid we need to move you to accommodate another passenger. Would you mind relocating to economy class? We'll compensate you." It was an insult, subtle yet sharp. Ibrahim raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" His voice was calm, his gaze steady. "No reason, sir," she stammered. "Just a small adjustment." "A guest more important than me?" Ibrahim asked, his voice still even. She had no answer. She simply smiled, but the tension was palpable now. Around them, passengers were starting to notice, but no one said anything. Ibrahim, however, remained unmoved. "No," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. "I will remain in my seat." Claire's pride was bruised, but she wasn't one to back down. "Sir, I insist. This is for operational reasons," she said, her tone a little colder. But Ibrahim didn't budge. He met her gaze with unflinching resolve. "If it's operational, then explain to me why I'm being asked to move and not anyone else." Claire hesitated, caught off guard by his calm resistance. The CEO still hadn't boarded. He was being held up at the gate as the airline scrambled to find him a seat. Meanwhile, Claire's frustration grew, and she began looking at other passengers. She approached another black man, asking him to move, then another, clearly targeting passengers who seemed out of place to her. That was her second mistake. Ibrahim watched in silence, his mind sharp, his body still. The quiet humiliation didn't anger him, it focused him. A young African man, perhaps in his late 20s, was asked to move to economy. Confused, he questioned the decision. But before he could be escorted, Ibrahim stood up. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're making decisions based on skin color, not tickets. That's discrimination." Claire was shaken. She didn't know how to respond. "Sir, please sit down," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. But Ibrahim didn't flinch. He locked eyes with her, his presence undeniable. For a moment Claire hesitated in feeling the weight of his gaze. But still, she didn't know who he was. To her, he was just another passenger causing trouble. She walked off, muttering under her breath in French, "These people always making noise." Finally, the CEO was allowed to board. He was greeted with extra courtesy, a glass of champagne offered as he took his seat. Ibrahim remained where he was, silent, steady. He knew what was happening, and he didn't need to say a word. The world would soon understand who had been insulted. As the CEO settled into his seat, Ibrahim's calmness contrasted sharply with the indulgent treatment the businessman received. Claire made sure the CEO was comfortable, attending to him with this kind of care reserved for VIPs. The message was clear. You matter, he does not. The plane took off, leaving behind French soil, but carrying with it a moment that would soon send ripples across nations. Inside the cabin, everything seemed normal again. Passengers relaxed, and the seatbelt signs were turned off. But there had been a shift, a quiet moment of resistance, a moment that would not be forgotten. Beneath the calm exterior of the plane, a storm was brewing. But Ibrahim Traoré remained still, silent, watching the world around him with an air of quiet patience. There were no outbursts, no complaints, just the steady composure of someone who knew what was coming. He didn't reveal his identity, didn't draw attention to himself. He simply sat, observing the unfolding scene as if watching a movie, one he already knew the ending to. Claire, the flight attendant, avoided looking his way. There was something unsettling about him, something she couldn't quite place, but she brushed it off. Mid-flight, she approached him with a practiced smile, asking if he wanted a drink. "Water will be fine," he replied. She nodded quickly and moved on, not bothering with pleasantries or even a simple thank you. The CEO on board, however, was treated like royalty. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in as he talked about his projects in Africa. "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us," he bragged. "We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded, completely unaware that the very man he was insulting was sitting just 2 rows away. Among the passengers, a woman from Burkina Faso, a nurse heading home to Bobo Dioulasso, noticed everything. She shook her head, muttering to her neighbor, "That's our president." They don't even know who they're humiliating. The neighbor stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief, but neither of them said a word. The president, it seemed, wanted no attention, and the silence hung in the air, unbroken. As hours passed, the cabin dimmed. Most passengers slept, but Ibrahim Traore remained awake, his eyes on the clouds outside. He wasn't angry, just patient. He knew that when the wheels touched the ground in Ouagadougou, his patience would become history. The plane began its descent, the lights flickering back on. The captain made the announcement in both French and English. Passengers stretched and fastened their seatbelts as they prepared to land. Claire moved through the cabin again, still smiling at the CEO, still ignoring Ibrahim. Outside, the view was stunning. The golden sun reflecting off the red soil, the city waking up beneath the plane. But what the passengers couldn't see was the convoy forming on the tarmac. Rows of black SUVs, military vehicles, and a presidential escort waiting for the plane. Whispers started to spread through the cabin, faint at first. "Are we landing in a war zone?" one foreign passenger asked nervously. No," another replied. "That's military protocol." Someone important must be arriving. The CEO smirked, straightening his suit. "Must be for me," he said, chuckling to Claire. She laughed with him, already planning to escort him ahead of the others. But before anyone could step off the plane, the entire atmosphere shifted. Outside the window, passengers saw presidential guards standing in perfect formation, weapons at their sides. Behind them, Burkina Faso's top ministers were waiting, men like the Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, the head of security, standing like statues, unmoving in the heat. Claire peeked out the window, her smile fading. "What is this?" she whispered. The CEO stood tall, confident. "Clearly, this is for me," he said, brushing his suit down. "I told you I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could move, the door opened and a tall officer in a black beret boarded the aircraft. His boots echoed across the floor as he walked down the aisle, scanning each face. He stopped at seat 2A, raised his hand to his forehead, and saluted. "Mura President, welcome home." The entire cabin froze. Silence fell. Claire's face drained of color as she looked between the officer and the man she had ignored for the entire flight. Her hands began to shake. Ibrahim Traoré stood slow and dignified without saying a word. The CEO, his arrogance crumbling, stumbled back. President? He stuttered. "Stop waiting." Traoré turned and gave him a simple nod. Nothing more, nothing less. A second officer entered and looked at Claire and the CEO. "You two will come with us," he said flatly. "Wait, what?" Claire whispered, still stunned. "Why me?" The officer's gaze was cold. "You are being detained for questioning. You publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. That's a serious offense." Claire tried to laugh nervously, but no one was laughing now. "I was just doing my job," she mumbled. The officer didn't respond. Traoré stepped off the plane, greeted immediately by his people, his ministers, his guards, and a cheering crowd. Cameras flashed as the nation's leader returned home. But no one had known him for who he truly was. For hours he had sat among them like an ordinary man. Now, those who had judged him, disrespected him, would face the consequences. Back on the plane, Claire and the CEO were led away in handcuffs, their smugness gone, replaced by confusion and panic. As they were escorted down the steps, the other passengers watched, stunned. The tarmac was blazing under the Burkina Faso sun, but all eyes were on the two individuals being escorted away in humiliation. The silence around them was deafening. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a small press gathering. He spoke calmly but with undeniable strength. "In Burkina Faso, we don't measure a man by the color of his skin. We don't bow to money or colonial legacies. Here we respect dignity and humanity. That is the new Africa." The story spread quickly, videos of the arrest, images of military salutes, the CEO looking like a child caught in a lie. Social media exploded. "Has to respect Africa" trended worldwide. Youth across the continent cheered, celebrating the moment they would never forget. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were formally charged with public insult and discrimination against the head of state. The French embassy tried to intervene, but Traoré was resolute. "This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation," he stated. "They will face justice, just like anyone else." Air France scrambled to manage the fallout, issuing a clumsy apology, but the damage was done. Citizens across Burkina Faso and beyond called for a boycott. Claire, now locked up in a detention center, broke down. "I didn't know who he was," she sobbed. "I was just following procedures." The investigator looked at her with cold eyes. "You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to treat him like a human being." The CEO, desperate to escape the consequences, tried to use his influence, but the court was clear. No immunity, no special treatment. The law would apply to all. Ibrahim Traoré, for his part, never gloated. He simply returned to his work, building roads, empowering youth, strengthening the nation. But the lesson of that moment, on that flight, would resonate far beyond Burkina Faso. A quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant blinded by prejudice, a CEO lost in arrogance, and a landing that would change everything.